So I'm gonna do some kind of crazy stuff, and I'm gonna see what she does. So you're gonna mirror me getting on and off the ground. Okay. As I'm gonna change my speed, you have to match my speed. Are you ready? Pause. No, I mean the dance, right? Yeah. Okay. Everyone go! Everyone go! Person 2 following! Keep the speed!
Ooh, okay.
Keep the height! Keep the height! Nice! Switch!
All right, go. All right. Keep going.
He wasn't down. 5 seconds.
Check this out.
Go.
I broke you, bro. Up, down, up, down. Freeze! Come with your partner to the middle, please. Come with your partner to the middle.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is now the second episode of the newly renamed podcast, Embodied Dialogue. And I'm really excited to have Christine Ruffolo here. And Christine is in Salem, Oregon, where she teaches high school physical education, but she also works with her own private clients, pain issues, motor control issues. I was curious to get her to explain. She says she blurs the line between those two. And then also and this is how I know Christine, she is the founder of, would you call it a collective, the Think Movement?
Yeah.
So this is, there's a website that people can check out, and we can put a link underneath the video to Think Movement, but this is also a group of people broadly speaking, in the world of movement who you all have had in-person gatherings. Strangely enough, we've forgotten about that, but it's a network of people who love movement, and I guess probably safe to say people who maybe have a little bit of an out-of-the-box approach to movement. Is that right?
Correct. I certainly would agree.
Okay. And just in terms of introducing yourself to the audience, is there's something more that you'd want to add, or just tell us?
More. Who are you?
Who are you?
Yeah, objectively, I'm a 41-and-a-half-year-old woman who has been teaching PE for the last 18 years, figuring out herself as she figures out movement, and just trying to put the pieces together. And like you said, it starts with physical education, right? This idea, like, you know what, if we were doing our job the way it should be done, we probably wouldn't have all these people like not moving after high school, right? There would be this joy of interacting with yourself and the environment, but that isn't the case. So and with that, like, where's everyone's introduction to like what movement and activity? It's physical education. So again, so the interest of it is, how do you kind of subvert the system from the inside?
Yeah, and we had one conversation where you were telling me a little bit about PE classes in Salem, Oregon, and especially during the pandemic, which in a culture that already doesn't move very much, like now we're a culture that really doesn't move very much. But so I'd love to hear about that, but maybe just to back up, you said something about like basically movement is, I think you said like how you figured out who you are, something along those lines. Can we just get a little bit of the backstory?
Sure, yeah. So I think everything revolves around identity. And growing up, I kind of fell into sports. My uncle was a sports person. He was just like amazing guy, and he liked sports, and he was interested if I was into sports. So I was like, well, let's play sports. Like we could do this. I was a bigger person. I tended to be very large hands, somewhat coordinated. Parents were happy to be like, yeah, go play softball. Like get out of here for a while. So just kind of fell into it. Was very competitive by nature. Sports, as any like typical athlete, a young will tell you, it's a way to get socially engaged with people without the threat. Because you're like, well, it's like in PE class, I get picked first, and things like that. So there's this sort of social currency that comes with being pretty good at sports.
Yeah.
So from that, I played all the sports in high school. Then college came, and all of a sudden nobody cares, and then I get picked up by this rugby team at Illinois, and that was like this skyrocket. It was like I just started playing, and they're like, you're an All-American, and now come play with the US team. And I was just like, what? Like when it's so interesting, you think it's like over, and so you do this like side gig, and all of a sudden this side gig is so wanting and accepting, and like I got
So was the national team like a professional level rugby?
I mean, we had to pay.
Okay. I guess that qualifies.
There was a select list to be asked to go, but I mean, I'll never forget the story. Like there's all these select sides, and all stars is where all the clout comes from. And so, I was on the Midwest team because I grew up in Chicago, and I was at the select side camp where all the regions of the US play each other, and the national team, the under 23, came up to me, and he was like, we really want you to go. He's like, you need a plane ticket, you need this, we need $1,000. And I was like, yeah, my dad's not paying $1,000. Like, it's so funny, this whole idea of like AAU. And I'm like, what happened to church league where you just went to you went to Incarnation, and then you played all the churches in the area. And now it's like, no, you need like your own coach, and you need AAU. And it's just like,
yeah. So I hear what you say. It was like a real roller coaster. Like, and when I was growing up, because of my father, he's actually a surgeon, he had a sabbatical year, and we moved to England. And this was the first time that I ever had seen rugby, and I'd seen a lot of American football. I didn't play, but I saw it on TV. But I was like, holy crap, like that's really rough. Like that is not that's a real rough and tumble kind of a game.
I know, and it's like, again, from the outside, and I completely see that, but there's such, like, when you're in it, there's such an organization to it. Like this was a game that was about getting the ball. And I was like, this is what I've been trying to do my entire life. Like I didn't care about shooting, I didn't care about scoring, but I was going to take the ball from you. And this whole game, like that was like, that could be my job, just getting the ball done. So it was just this merger of the nuances of the game that I loved, and then a game in which that is very valuable. But if I can go back just a little bit to that story about the coaches, and I remember like someone had a cell phone. This was 99, and someone had a cell phone, and I think it was the coach. He was like, yeah, why don't you just call your dad right now, and you're like, tell him you need this, this, and this, and a check. And I remember like reluctant, because again, my dad's an immigrant. Like we didn't, it was, I mean, we were middle class, but we existed as if we were like lower poor middle class, because he came here with zero things, and he raised an entire family, has a house on it. So I knew the way that things with money were, and I was like, there's no way this is going to happen. And I remember telling him the story. I was like, yeah, Dad, there's this, I'm cell phoning my dad, first time with the cell phone, but being like, the US team came by, and this coach came by, and they're going to have this tour at the end of the year, and we're supposed to go to England, and we're going to, he wants to play for the US, and we're going to play Wales and Scotland and England. And it's a great opportunity, but it costs $1,000, and I know that's not, so it'll be okay but he just wanted me to ask. And so as I'm waiting for like that, like, no, that's not going to happen, which I expected, there was this pause, and he says, who do you want me to write the check to? And I was like, and I think, and it's funny as I like feel that, and I'm actually,
yeah, how does that feel? I mean, he really came in and supported you, and you were just expecting the opposite. That must have been an amazing moment.
It's so weird telling this story and getting a little choked up now, because like I'm here in Chicago taking care of him.
Right. Right.
So, but
Right.
I think that was a moment where it was like, oh, like this could be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I guess, you have support for this thing that this whole time, and this goes to individualism that you talked about, this whole time, the American story of like, it's just you and your bootstraps and this, and, work it out on your own, and summers at the park, and you want to feed that story, and like, this is you made yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that you were made by a whole bunch of other people. Again,
Right. You
you're on their
mentioned
shoulders.
individualism, and this is just for the audience because we were chatting before we hit record. On the Think Movement website, you have a blog post about the fallacy of individualism, and I'm already sort of like anticipating, because we're going to get to Think Movement, but you described yourself growing up, and I can see the context as being very competitive, and yet Think Movement is this kind of network of mutual support. This is great to see. This is where you started, and I'm getting the excitement and the competition. I'm gonna get the ball, and like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of ranged back, if I peel back from Think Movement a little bit more, where it was like, and I had the whole competitive athlete, someone in the elite range. I got to do all these cool things through rugby, and then injury hits.
Yeah.
And, those, and this weird thing where like those people that you competed against and that motivated you, there's nobody there when you're injured.
Yeah.
Like, even the teammates that you had, like, the game goes on without you. And this is the point where you're like, oh, like the game doesn't love me back. Oh, I got it. Like, again, all those stories you tell, and all the suffering you put yourself through to have this rocky story in your brain that motivated you. So it really was this kind of like back to the wall, like, oh, okay, like I've got it wrong. I've had it wrong this whole time. So I basically
like,
started.
did you almost have a sense of like betrayal?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I almost, like, I want to say almost regret, because I had these experiences, but yeah, you put all this stuff into this game for this game. And it's if you thought this game was a person and that they loved you, and then you realize, like, on to the next, when you were at your lowest and you needed them the most.
Right. Do you know this book by James Carse called Finite and Infinite Games?
No.
Oh, you might love that book, but it's all about life. But he talks about two different kinds of games. There's the game that the point of the game is winning, and then there's the game that the point of the game is to continue the game, to keep playing. Right? That's the infinite game. But like most sports are a finite game, and that doesn't mean the culture couldn't actually have an infinite culture, but probably if it had that, like, the team would probably be visiting you in the hospital and like raising money for your, or whatever it was. Yeah. But I imagine that your experience of like, oh, team spirit, this is great, I got community, I got buddies, and then something happens and it falls away. Like, I imagine maybe even clients of yours, like, you've probably seen that story played out many times. I imagine that's a pretty common story.
Yeah, and I mean, college was really that group of girls and just like loving each other and being together and wanting to be together. That goes away after you leave college and you don't live together and you're commuting to Portland to play and stuff. But I also have to take responsibility for that, because as I realized very profoundly about a week ago, it's like I could have had the people, but I chose the game. Right? It was always about the game. Like, I wanted to get basketball. I wanted to understand rugby. To be good at rugby, I specifically didn't go to the socials, and I didn't get drunk, and I didn't do all that other side of rugby. I stayed very centered in. So of course it's going to end up like that. Again, you get out what you put in.
Right.
So I have to take some responsibility. I can't be like, there are terrible people. It wasn't that at all. It was just circumstances. And,
and rugby is not like a terrible game either.
No,
I mean, everything that you're learning in terms of coordination, cooperation, and just, yeah, even like the art of the game, like I got the sense of you, like just that I was a soccer player growing up, but the sense of like, some people call it a field sense, like you sort of see the ball is probably about to go that way and you're already like you just, there are some real, just like, I don't know, irreplaceable experiences through especially team sport that I think translate beyond the game for sure.
Yeah, it was very, I mean, with rugby was the first time I recognized that people had like specific roles on a team, right? Your body looks like this, you're good at this, do that. Those small, fast people over there, they're going to do the running. And you're like, oh, this is amazing. Like, again, it's where everybody had a role and could do the thing that they did well. I mean, when you're a 5-on-5 basketball team, you got to do both. So, so that was.
So what happened after the injury? Like you didn't return to rugby?
Yeah, well, I tried. Right, you tried, and the thing about injury is I blew out my ACL, and I got it surgically repaired with my own hamstring. And I remember going through physical therapy and then being like, okay, you're done. And I'm like, I can't do anything that I used to do. And they're like, no, and it was at that point I was like, okay, because like an athlete, I did everything I was supposed to do. I did it to a T. I did as much as I possibly, I did more than I probably should have done, and I still wasn't whole. Like something's wrong here. So it was at that point, and this was like early to mid 20s, where I was like, all right, I need to take this in my own hands. I gotta figure this out. So then I switched from the performance world into like the rehab world, and I was just consuming all the rehab information. Because it's interesting, as an athlete, basically your job is to divorce yourself from your body. So that the pain doesn't touch you, the issue, you're not tired, you're not anything. All you are is this machine, this beautiful, obedient robot that just does what they need to do during the time allotted. So
yeah, I remember growing up, I was always amazed by like, I was like a baseball fan, but some key player is out with an injury, but then they always talk about, but they're going to be back like in, they can't make Wednesday's game, but they're going to be on the starting lineup on Thursday. And I was just thinking, what they say happened to their ankle, like, I think I'd be in bed for a couple of weeks. Like, and then it was just like always, bouncing back, right back in the game,
Yeah, well, that goes back into like the value, right? If you're not playing the game, you have no value. So everybody thinks that, again, the game made me. It's like, wait a minute, like you made the game. Like the game was just your vehicle. Like you were already you. And this is the stuff that you forget when you constantly tunnel vision. So basically I had to go from divorcing my body to like rekindling my relationship with it and recognizing that, my knee and my leg and my body is more important than this game. Like,
was that a struggle to reverse your psychology that way?
Yeah, because I found so much success on it. And I wasn't even looking to be successful. There's a weird thing where people are like, you're amazing. And you're like, really? Like, I'm just the same, but when they put you up on that pedestal, you can't help but to kind of like lean in that direction and be like, all right, maybe you're right and I'm wrong. Which is just how far you fall when injury hits and you're no longer this, because you're not even you at that point.
Yeah.
Right. Because you become this other thing that was made of you. Right.
Because your identity was this star athlete and now you're limping around with this injury.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, I remember, it's funny because I'm teaching PE at this time. So it's probably 2-3 years. And I remember I specifically remember this point.
While you were rehabbing, you were teaching PE?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But I remember this point where it was the end of class and there were all the balls and we had to put the basketballs back in the bin. I remember like I couldn't even bend down to pick up this ball without a searing pain. And it was just like, okay, something's way off. So it was just then my own personal journey to like start to unravel, like what's going on? How does it feel? What is happening? Which had nothing to do with the outcome. Right. So now I'm through the tunnel on the other side and I don't have any physical goals. All I want to do is keep learning this thing. And so, I mean, you should see me. I'm at the rec center with my dad. You should see me on these machines and what I'm doing. It's all old people. I'm just like swinging, and I'm like, could I use the machine that way? So it goes, and we revert all the way back to childhood, where everything is playful. This is what you talked about, like, you know, the pain and play, the merging. It's like you have to be able to engage and have a curiosity and a confidence in order to play. And pain makes you want to do nothing. Right? So you have to kind of, the first thing you need to do is you need to understand the pain, and to understand the pain, you have to enter it, which is so opposite again of the athletes. And pain is typically avoided. You know, I remember talking to my dad. He's like, yeah, if I just sit here in this chair all day, I'm not in pain. I'm like, but Dad, what that means is that your life is sitting in a chair all day. Like there was just a disconnect. Like, again, here's the mirror. So that, then I started kind of just writing about, this is the kind of the way I work. I have these, my thinking is literally me talking to myself in my head in like a character role. Like I would be interviewing myself. And you know, I just kind of went through this thing where I thought I've learned enough and figured out enough to be like, let me put it out there. And part of the switch from competitive to cooperative was to give it away for free. Like on my personal blog is Post-Competitive Insight. And it was all about like, here's all the stuff that I would have greedily hoarded for myself, and I'm just gonna put it out there.
And so you started doing this while you were still in your own healing process?
Yeah, I would say after you go through the figuring things out, to be able to have an output. And once I started to have an output, instead of just be an input vehicle, that's when everything changed for me. And it's funny because now, like, I feel all I am is output. And so I have so little bandwidth for input.
Right. Well, just to understand you, so you were rehabbing, and you were teaching PE, and you were at a point where you had that day of trying to pick up a basketball and it was too painful. And here you are in front of a class, like teaching movement. And then you started talking about, you know, I imagine you're slowly getting better as you're discovering different ways, and you're sort of like, as you said, reversing the thinking, you know, and more in the spirit of self-care. But then when you said things started changing, when you started sort of putting stuff out into the world, you started writing, would you even say that like your rehab, like your personal well-being, like you got better by giving? Is that kind of the sense of what you were saying?
Absolutely, right. And again, the class is always a product of the teacher. Right. So now I was an athlete. I mean, the kids for the first two, like I said, I was teaching, the kids for the first 2, 3, 4 years of me teaching called me Rugby. And I was completely okay with that. Like I didn't have a name. They just be like, hey, Rugby, because we would like play rugby in PE. And like, so again, the identity stuff is nuts. But absolutely.
That reminds me, I used to work in factories for a while, and you know, there'd be people from all over the world, but half the time the person's name was just the name of their country, and people were just yelling out. I was like, how can you do this? And everyone was doing it. It was like, no. Yeah,
like what is the quick memorable thing about this person? And again, like, and this is like the weird twist is like there was such pride in being that. Like I don't even have a name. I'm a game. And this
I am Rugby.
You know, so bizarre looking back. But yeah, so it's, I was gonna say, as I figured out, oh my gosh, the body and the life and experience is so much more than these games. As I learned stuff in rehab that worked, I started to like venture out and try to figure out games and stuff and activities and knowledge. I started to be able to see if the kids would find any of this stuff. Again, these aren't broken beings at this point. But do the kids find any of this stuff interesting? Maybe some of them are athletes, and maybe them, right? Their coach doesn't know anything about, like, you know, they're going to say, see the trainer or walk it up, because everybody wants to outsource issues. Like, go to this person, go to that person. And it's just like, wait, can you like sit with it and know what to do? Maybe.
So I imagine you're even looking at these kids and you're kind of seeing yourself when you were younger, and you were the one who got picked for the team first, and everything was fine and there was no injuries yet. But maybe at this point you're sort of seeing what led to the injury years earlier.
Yeah. And what's missing? Look at all the stuff that's missing. Like maybe I could give them all those gaps that I realized a decade later. Maybe I could start to fill in those gaps now. So at the very least, they'll have some semblance of like what to do and how to, again, it's how to take care of yourself. Like
On the Think Movement website, you have a bunch of different contributors, and I got to join as a contributor recently. And you have a series of questions, you know, just to help people get to know the different contributors. One of the questions you ask is like, what was your experience of movement education in schools? And so I'm wondering, like, I guess this is maybe a more general question, but of course you're going to draw on your experience, but what do you see in terms of kids and movement in the schools
nowadays
in the US? Yeah.
General PE,
but even in the classroom, I mean, what is just like the experience of a kid in school as a movable human body who you know, has all this potential? What's going on there when you look at it?
So PE through a kid's eyes is a place where they get to have fun, a place where they get to turn their brain off, a place where they get to play, but also it is a play. I just wrote a piece about this. It is a place of great social anxiety, a mirrored reflection of how little your body as a young person can do. Like you can't sit on the floor and have you can't get into closed bleachers. Like it really is. And again, these kids are doing, and not all of them, of course, but probably way too many are not doing anything other than they're not walking to school. They've got nothing to play with. They're in their room with their phone or their computer, and that's it. So they literally have zero. There used to be a background they came in with that you build off of, and now it's so low, and it's even negative. Like there's spatial awareness. If I have something, I put like, I use the floor as like my desk in the gym, but if I have a stack of papers and a box of pencils on the floor, they're gonna get kicked. They're gonna get kicked once, if not twice, by the people coming in. They're a relational, again, because everything's been a foot from them. This is where their focus has been in school. If they're on their computer, I like sub classes. And I'm like, you guys are all on your Chromebook, and like nobody's interacting. And I'm just like, why are you in school? Like we just had a whole year of it. And yes, I was a sub, and maybe, but things that don't make sense to me, right? And why are they in school? They're in school to see their friends, like.
And of course, for you and I, when we grew up, like you already mentioned the story of your first ever cell phone. You know, my daughter's 13 and she just got a phone, and like, you know, it was a very like, I don't know if I want to give you this, but like she's like the last one of her friends to get the phone too. And yet, I mean, this must be, from that point of view also, this is really interesting because like, you know, the next generation, they I mean, really, even this generation, they have no experience of that. Some kids are walking to school, but that's probably not as common as it used to be, and just like not moving at all. I teach workshops where, you know, that I'm a Feldenkrais method practitioner, and one of the things that struck me recently, you know, I can get into all kind of specifics and work on all this biomechanics, but one of the things that just struck me recently, and is something I'm talking about with people all the time, is just there's this way that a lot of us have this sense of like, I'm supposed to sit still, right? You know, versus just like even having a little sway or a little movement, which is just isn't a problem with you. I've been noticing you've been dancing the whole time, which is great. But I led a workshop where I even highlighted this, and then we were in a conversation, but I said, hey, let's all just kind of sway while we're talking. And, you know, there was one person in particular who had brought something up around this. And so after a while I came back to her and I said, you know, what was that like? We were moving and we were talking, and then she sort of stopped, and then she was talking, and then she's like, oh, I realized that when you started talking to me, I stopped moving. And she just hadn't even realized it. But, you know, in my mind, it's just like, aside from PE class, like sit still. That's I know that my daughter's hearing that constantly in school. And there's a way that kids, just by enjoying their bodies, they kind of disturb the adults, because it's like, you're bouncing around in the corner of my vision.
Absolutely. And again, we think of the systems. I mean, there's a gentleman on the think window named Jim Frieda, and this whole sitting epidemic is like his
Mm-hmm.
spearheaded target. But it is a way of being compliant, and all of it is them wanting you to act more adult. And the question is like, what's so great about acting like an adult? Right? Like all this thing. Again, if I watch the average adult move and the average kid move, I want the way the average kid moves, like every single time, like times 10.
Right.
And it just seems it's so quick how the younger people are losing that, because now what's happening, and I relate this to like family members, now what's happening is that the generation that grew up with technology is having kids, and they soothe with technology. So when that kid is crying, and I literally witnessed this with my nephew, we were outside in the backyard, he was laying on a blanket, the wind is blowing through the trees and the leaves, and he looks up and just like, very austere, just noticing the wind and the sound and the feeling. And mom comes over, it's like, here's an electronic toy, and it's like all this lights and all this sound, and the poor kid's like, like I just wanted to enjoy the trees and the leaves. But mom was like, take a look at this. And what if we think about, and this goes back to care, what that really is mom needs a break. Mom doesn't want to sit with you in the grass and notice the leaves, because mom's had enough. Right.
Well, and I mean, of course, the flip side, especially during the pandemic, is moms really have had enough.
Yeah. I mean, and then that's
right.
the end.
Yeah.
Right? It's the outsourcing. Like, let me outsource these kids to you for a bit. Please take them for 8 hours so I have some me time. And we found out when that gets taken away, and it's so interesting. Like you can go into like the math stuff and all this. Like, parents really have very strong values until we say you do it our way or you homeschool your kid. And then they'll rumble, but they'll still send their kid in. So if they didn't really had an issue with it, they would just keep them. They don't want to keep them because the system has built in time.
Well, I know some people who homeschool, and it is a real dilemma, because people who homeschool feel pretty strongly about what's going on in the schools, and I can relate, but then it's like, that's their life. It's really hard to do anything else if you're homeschooling.
Yeah.
So we talked once before, and you were telling me just some stories about your PE class during the pandemic. Could you talk about that? Because I think we're already sort of leading into that,
Yeah. So long story short, must have been 2020, we were told that spring break was going to be a few extra days. Like everyone's like, hooray. And then everything got shut down in March, and then they're like, we're not coming back. So it was like, so since we had 3/4 of the school year complete, basically they were like, give them some enrichment stuff. Like, again, the weirdness of our society is like, give them stuff to do, but don't really take into account what they're doing. This is all extra stuff. Their grades are already set. They've done enough work, again, because we're based on seat time or not. So me personally, I was like, oh man, this is great, because now I have this anonymity, because all these black Zoom squares, like, again, they don't really need to be here. I'm not going to force you to do anything. Like, if you hear these kids like accidentally put on their microphone, there's like screaming kids and babies, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you came. Like, thank you for coming. Right. So it's basically you talking to a bunch of black squares. And
my daughter liked to keep her camera off for a lot of the virtual school. Yeah.
And so it was this thing. It's like, well, what can we actually do in this that is relative? Like, I could give you a list, a bunch of links and a list of exercises to do, but there's no accountability if you're going to do it. And they're much more savvy on the phone than we are. Do you think if they wanted an ab routine that they couldn't find one? The same thing as running, like why we don't run the mile. The streets are open and free. If you want to run, run. I'm not going to make you run. I don't want you to hate something. Like, none of this makes any sense. So what it really became was this kind of talking about topics and issues and the mental health and talking about life. It really became this weird philosophical class. And
how old are the kids that you're with?
High school.
High school
So,
kids.
yeah, so anywhere between 14 and like 17.
You created a space for them to connect and relate.
Yeah, I mean, in the next year, the entire year, actually, it was reversed. It was 3/4 of the year was online, and then the last quarter was in person, and like that mattered the most, which didn't make any sense to us because we're like, last year it didn't count. But you know, everybody needs to promote something in some way.
And what I remember you saying was like you got a huge class, like you had like what, like 50 kids?
They 60.
This is when you were
60.
back in person.
Yeah, so you know, I can't even see all the squares on my screen, and I'm like, but what was really interesting about that, because there's no feedback. You don't know they're here, they're quiet. You don't know, are they resting? Are they taking a nap? Like, are they playing a video game? Like, you don't know. But what was the coolest thing about that time is I always do written finals. I always do written finals because what I see can also be a projection of a story. I want to know what's inside of you. What did I miss that went on, that rewatching 60 other kids that I missed, that I could have missed, you know, as much as an observer as I am. And the finals that talked about mentally what they were going through, socially, what was happening, emotional stuff, blew me away.
Well, I can't imagine what the questions were because that doesn't sound like your typical PE written.
No, yeah, I mean,
what did you ask them?
Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head because
you asked them about their experience. It sounds
yeah, basically, and like what topic or conversation resonated with you, and I have all this on the YouTube, by the way. All this stuff is out. Like I put it out there. I don't.
Oh, we'll have to get some links to that too.
I mean, I don't.
Video, so
I'm not the type of person to enter like a marketing machine to be like, let people see this. I feel like my job is to put it out there freely and let people stumble upon it. But they were so raw and so honest. It was like, oh damn, like they were listening. They were listening when sometimes I'll just talk with one person, and usually it's like through text, because again, the safety of anonymity. So we would get into this like really deep, interesting life stuff and almost like debates of like what is healthy, and you know, at the beginning we had some smoke fires in Oregon, right? I would tell them, because we had like a time set, so I have to be on Zoom every time, and I had this spot where I can look out the window, and I'm like, you know, there's this guy that runs every single day at this time, right? And people are like, yeah, that's pretty healthy. And I'm like, when the fires came and the smoke, and it was dangerous to be outside, this guy was still running. Now, is that healthy or unhealthy? Like, where's the health risk now? And so we got into this again because it disrupted the story of like, work hard, you know, gut it out. What's the word I can't stand? Grit. Oh, I can't stand the word grit.
You must have heard that a number of times
it's
yourself.
Like all grit is making things hard when it doesn't have to be. Literally sandpaper.
And so you led some conversations like this also when the kids were back in person with you, like just sitting in the gymnasium also?
Yeah, because it's one of these things about human behavior you could tell is that people really actually want to talk about themselves and their existence and their life, but there isn't a class that allows it. Because it's always like, listen to what learn what I'm saying. And so in this wonderful class of PE that nobody cares about, which is the beauty of it, no administrators are like, are you guys learning basketball? Nobody cares. We can do anything we want with it. So I would have these, I would be like, we're going to have a nutrition discussion, right? And I would bring them into this room that wasn't the gym. It's called the mat room, where there's like a whiteboard. And I would be like, so I got all this stuff ready to go, but is there anything that you guys would like to talk about before we start? And a brave person would, how do you get over a broken heart? And it was like, right? And that was a and then because again, you saw people like answer and get into it. And then you saw everybody was interested, but they didn't know what to say. So it's like watching a movie. They learned about the topic by watching these people interact about it. And it was the most, again, and it was like, oh, it's time to go.
So is your whole, like, I'm just wondering, like, for you to get to the point of leading a class to, let's talk about broken hearts, you know, in PE class, is it pretty much all just coming out of your reversal of that kind of willpower game that or did you at a certain point, like, you know, start, I don't know, did you do psychology? Did you do other stuff that led to this, or did you just sort of like see these kids as like kind of like you used to be growing up, and you wanted them to have a different experience? You're just kind of making it up, or how did that happen? Because you're like the coolest PE teacher that I've. You don't sound like my daughter's PE teacher. You don't remind me of my PE teachers growing up either.
Well, here's the thing that seems counterintuitive, but the class needed to be less me and more them. I needed to talk less and start listening. And the same thing was happening to my body. I needed to start listening, not telling it.
But that's like the reverse of like what every public school teacher does. It's like the kids need to be quiet and shut up, and I'm talking.
Yeah, and again, and that's why, again, you have to look at the system at that objective and be like, what's the issue? Oh, like the kids don't get a say. All they are doing is revolving around the adults. We need to flip this. Again, I worked for you, kids. Like I worked for you. Let me listen to you. Because again, when you give them even the opportunity to speak, like you see what happens. You see where they're like struggling and constipated, and you see where like they become alive. And all I do is I follow the aliveness and I get out of the way. Like that's what education, again, these kids can learn. These kids can learn anything they want to learn. They don't care about, they need to care about it though. So the issue is that it isn't presented in that this subject is them. I like to teach, health and PE, like the class is you. All this stuff, all this coordination and conditioning, like this is just a mirror to you. Like, what do you see, and do you like it or do you not? And if you don't, like, what do you want to do about it? And if you do, how the heck do you? What's your attitude? Let's get it out there so these guys can hear and see, like, oh no, I'm not looking for perfection. I just want to have a good time. How do you have a good time, right? Like these life existential things that pop up, because what we're really dealing with is people. And that's it. As soon as I recognized it had nothing to do, and I didn't want these kids to become me, and I didn't, it's great that they improve, but for them, they don't care if they improve. If they were like, subpar and kids make fun of them and they got better and kids still made fun of them, that growth means zero. So how do we get it? How do we make them peers? Conversation. Where nobody.
I mean, what I'm hearing is you're really giving them the opportunity to have a sense of self-worth, which then they might go apply to chemistry, or they might apply it to something that has nothing to do with what happens in PE class, but it's that sense of who I am that's actually being allowed to express itself.
Creating a sense of meaning, your own sense of meaning. That's what everything is. It's got to mean something to you. You've got to write the story. You've got to be the one that is, whatever motivates you, like, how do we connect it? It's really what I do is connect the dots that they show me. Like,
so was this too, in addition to your writing, sort of part of your personal transformation and, getting back to a sense of comfort in your body and with yourself?
I think me starting to write was getting over that initial fear of like, what will people say? Or again, like you're wrong, and you don't, because when you live in your own world, which I do, like you're never wrong. Like all you do is you're constantly. So I remember when I first started writing, I just started like, how do you get people to read? Just put it on Reddit. So I just started like slapping links all over Reddit, and some people were really, really cruel and mean, and I'd be like, right? So it was this point, again, am I going to let these certain people shut me up and stop my output, or am I going to shrug it off and be like, they didn't get it, they didn't get what I was trying to say, I still have more. And so I think as I went through that journey myself in this like fake internet setting, I was able to create space to, as I figured out how I did it, how to help the kids do it.
That's funny, because it occurs to me that socializing on the internet is kind of like high school.
Absolutely. Right.
So you can deal with that.
Yeah, and it's like confession, like put a curtain where you don't know who they are, and like you're just getting people shouting at you, like you don't really. I mean, it is, everything is a jockeying of position and hierarchy. And when you recognize, like, I could just be and let them pass by, life's so much easier.
So let's talk about, you know, in whatever order it makes sense as we kind of progress through the story. Eventually, you're also working with adults, with individuals with pain, and eventually you create Think Movement, and it feels very much like this is all. It's not. These don't feel like detours. It really feels like there's a continuity to all of these stories.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like that in the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm in each moment. Again, I'm in the story, and I'm, you know, you're in the real time, present time. So basically what happened is, as I took a detour from sports, and sport being the end all and be all of who I am and what I offered to kids, I started going to a lot of these workshops. And the school gave me gives me $600 a year to like attend these workshops. And I was like, wow, like I'm a public educator. I'm giving some of $1,000 workshops to these kids for free. Like, there should be a vehicle in which I get paid to attend this thing. And then I'm going to be like, hey, world, this is what you learned at a Fighting Monkey workshop. This is what FRC is. So I just started like, here, take it. I just started giving it away. Again, I removed the veil. I removed the firewall of payment. And I started just doing that. And part of that was, and it was cool, it was a cool social event going to all these.
Do you want to just briefly say something about, because I don't know if everyone watching will know Fighting Monkey. I happen to know that the Fighting Monkey research group, for example, and then FRC is another whole story. But even just in terms of like, what are you getting at these workshops that kids don't tend to get in PE class? Yeah, so what I found is that when I attended these workshops, what I was really studying was how they engaged a group of people. Mm-hmm. I was studying the teaching, right? With FRC was really early on, so it was like, what is the system? And like, because again, it was the hottest, coolest thing, and I did this way before it became like a hot ticket item. So I was trying to say, like, for example, the Fighting Monkey. Fighting Monkey is basically what they're selling is how to play. That's literally what they're selling. So I understood this inherently, but I didn't really know how to set it up. Like, these kids who are coming in expecting to have a bunch of basketballs and baskets down, like, how do you introduce them to new ideas? And that's what I was trying to glean from these workshops. And so I would go to these things, I would take these notes, and then the blog post would be my output. And it would also be my resource page. Like, how did that go again? Oh, okay. Oh, I can make these Fighting Monkey balls for like 50 cents. Oh, like, perfect. Here we go. I need 40 of them. Okay, we're talking about a tennis ball on a string,
on a string.
That you swing around and people are dodging to get out of the way, but then all your joints are doing this stuff that they don't normally do.
Well, that's even you saying that is so funny to me. Like, we're so quick to like make proper playing around, right? It's like, can we just give play its due and not say that it's coordination or spacing or rhythm, or can we just be like, hey,
right, the sense of like, what do I get from entering that state of being that is play, as opposed to, I partly said that because not everyone knows about the Fighting Monkey ball, but no, I think it's a great point. I mean, I had a client recently who came, and it was kind of the same as what I said before. Like, we were talking, and like, what was going on with her, like, we could have investigated her shoulder blades. We could have looked at, the pattern of flexion, and it was just like, but instead I put my table in the middle of the room and we stood on one wall, and I said, I'll race you to the other side, and the table's in the way, and we just did that. And after a while, she was breathing so much better and everything had changed, and it was just like, maybe we didn't need to get too technical today.
And like, that's so like the main idea of, okay, we feel, especially as like coaches and trainers, or however you want to, leaders, or again, I see myself as really none of that. Again, by title, I'm a teacher, but I'm just a person that's thrown in with 50 kids and have to figure out what to do. Right? Like that's the general trend. But it is like, we have to justify what we do, and we need research to back it up. And it's just like, I don't know, like, these 50 kids, I'm pretty sure n equals 50 will give me a pretty good idea. Like, they're like, these arm circles are boring. I'm like, really? They're the hottest thing in movement culture. You don't like them? Okay. let me just get a quick video and put you on Instagram, just so the FRC people know I'm bringing it into PE. Like, it's such a circle of, yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's really funny. I mean, and of course, as someone who makes a living in the world of movement, I picked up the basic message a few years ago. Well, you got to be on social media, got to put stuff out. And there's a way that, yeah, you begin to work with appearance, whereas supposedly the idea was embodiment. But it's like inherently, and there are those people who I really respect who somehow manage to put out what we call great content, because it actually is, but I think it comes from this spirit of what you say, of just giving. And of course, if you make a living, you have to make a living. So you're gonna have click here to find out more, and you're gonna have that as part of what you do. But it's a real insidious, it can be. So let's talk a little bit about a think movement, because this could, I just see an opportunity to segue, right? But I remember one of the things you said to me early on is like, sure, like think movement, it's a website, it's got a bunch of movement people on it, and people could go to the website and discover you, but this is really not a marketing scheme, it's something else. So let's talk about what is think movement.
Okay, so let's talk about its original ideation, because there was a bit of a marketing in the beginning. It was like, so basically I'm going to these workshops, I'm giving it all away. And I'm like, man, I'm one person. What if I got 10 people who I could tell through social media was like similar to me, going to the, what if they also were up for putting what they learned? Then we could have this massive, we could give it all away, right? Like it was just this massive library. So, and then it was like, oh, okay. And well, what people really like, I go back to the kids again, they like their paper on the fridge. So, if I took their work and I put it on Think Movement, then they would share it. So now, other than this little group that is my world, they would share it within world. So that was, I have to be honest, like that was part of the original, like, what's it for? Because it always had to do with work, right? It always had to do with the purpose. And it was like, how do I get the ideas out there? And what it has become is that, again, I mentioned, I could have had people, but I chose the game. And what has become is that I'm choosing people. Mm-hmm. So we, in 2019, we started in 2017. It was basically me just messaging people, hey, I like what you do. You want to be on this thing? And people would say yes or no for whatever their reasons. In 2019, I was like, we got to have an event. I got to bring them. So basically, I rented out Woodburn, the pool, the gyms, the mat room, and we had like our own little teach and learn.
Is that the school where you teach?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're in PE class, except with all the think movement people.
Right. And this is the zoom out that I was like, oh, it's like, I'm kind of doing this. So like, these are students in my class. And again, I'm manipulating your human behavior. I'm just saying what is it that people want? They want to be heard. They want to be able to present. They want to learn. And all of this is, again, happening for free. I was like, stay at my house. All you got to do is get here. So again, if we remove the firewall of money, who's going to show up? Mm-hmm. So that happened in 2019. We did another one at another place, a gal, Jen Pilates, in 2020. By the way, all
is this
the videos,
like maybe a dozen people getting together? What did it look like?
Yeah. I would say about a dozen. The first one was, the first one is always super special. I mean, there's a guy named Andre Miller that he has a farm in Oregon, and that was where we started. Like, we foraged on his farm and we cooked food there, and we all ate together. We all made the meal, and it was just like, hey, how you doing? And then we had our study days in it. And I have to be honest, put the energy that it took to put that on. I had to be like, as soon as we got into the house, it was me and 3 other people were staying at the house. I was like, you guys are beautiful, but I have to go to sleep. And they're all on the couch, hands on, and be like, okay, have a good night. Right? And so I got to check out and take a nap, and they got to do what they wanted. It was beautiful.
I bet it was really impactful for people to connect.
I mean, there were even the personal relations, how I mentioned a guy named Jim Frieda, and the process of this guy who felt he was under threat and nobody would listen to him. And to have this group of people being like, no, we want to listen to you, but you're so angry and you're so definitive. Could you be open? And to see this guy open and how he transformed was just like, oh my God, yes, this is, and then I mean, movement is the core of it, but really about people supporting each other.
But that's so, I mean, I'd love to just pause on that, because how often do we see someone who's angry and, like, I think what a lot of people do, just be like, well, I'm just going to turn around, walk the other way. And then that person is always the angry person. And what you're telling me is that in this situation, the so-called angry person was this beautiful soul underneath, but just hadn't had the opportunity. And so again, this is just kind of putting it all together, like, you know, from your story, from you know, compared to this like win for the team, or you know, we'll see you later if you can't make the trial.
Yeah, that's the thing. What's underneath? What's the person that walked up? Like, you have value because you walked up, not because you made the team or you scored the best. Like, just because you said yes.
You want to participate.
Yeah. So it really was this tremendous event. You know,
so you started doing more of these get-togethers with the
well, we did the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second one, I was like, man, that was a lot of work. I don't know if I want to put that on. And then we had it in California at Jen Pilates' place, and it had a much more teach and learn and kind of less social feel to it, just because, you know, a lot of people were from California. It was like everybody could go home. So, I mean, it was still worthwhile. And again, all these videos are up on the Think Movement website.
Right.
So we finished it, and, you know, I met a Darien Bard there. So there's a lot of good things, new people coming into the fold. But what I realized in 2020, especially during the quarantine and all that, is like, man, what I really wanted was people. So this get together focal place to teach and learn became, hey, I'm going to do a West Coast travel tour. I'm going to start in LA. Does anyone want to hang out and get together? You don't got to teach anything. We could go sit under a tree. We could take a walk. And that had that, even though there was much less people involved, because again, you kind of really weed out why people are there. And you're like, there's nothing in this for you marketing wise. It's just spending time. That's what care culture is. It's like, are you willing to give someone time and attention and really hold that space with them?
Yeah, care culture, that's a one of the headings on the Think Movement website. Can you just sort of zoom in on that and tell people what care culture is?
Because I realized that is like the essence of what we were trying to cultivate, is like people interacting with other people. The humanity of it all. Again, I'm going to fly to LA. I'm going to right? Like, if you want to hang out, let's hang out, let's get together. And we would sit there and we would talk. A group of, there was like 6-7 of us decided to get together in LA, and we were at this guy Nick Konow's house, and we sat underneath his playground set while his kids played in and out, and we talked about life, and we watched his kids, and we talked about other things. And did you notice that? And it was just people coming together to like appreciate being together, and to recognize the situation they're in, and to interplay the conversation, and to have these honest things. Again, it's like, we're not going to record it. This isn't about content getting, it isn't about any of this. It's just, hey, let's hang out. And you walked away from that really feeling like, wow, like, not only do I have people, but that was transformed, because again, they all had choices. They all had choices to come from wherever they needed to come, an hour, half hour, and to spend that time. And the reason we had it at Nick's is because, you know, he has 4 kids and he's kind of like the caregiver. So he was like, it's going to be hard for me to get away. And I was like, well, let's just come to you, like any Fred would do. Right. So again, if you input the habits and behaviors that are friend-like, or what you hope to be a friend to be, what will come out of it? And you're like, oh, snap, an actual friend. So we did that. And so basically we did that in LA, and then we went to Oakland. We stayed at a gal named Kat Cowie's house. We hung out with Jen again there. So knowing again how little effort it took, didn't have to like schedule things or set up spaces or you know, buy out the pool. I didn't have to do, all I had to do was show up.
You say it takes little effort, but it still sounds like you're doing something so out of the ordinary. I mean, it does. It is, because it really, we could hear how simple it is. Oh, I called someone up and we hung out, right? But it's like you're organizing that at a point in time where I actually saw somewhere recently a statistic that literally the number of friends you have, that's a statistic that is going down in the United States and probably elsewhere. And, you know, just just interaction and being together. And I think as movement teachers, regardless of the modality that we're trained in, I remember, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast I did too, but the first time I did an individual Feldenkrais session with someone, who didn't pay me because I barely know what I'm doing. I'm like, can you please come so I can, but at the end of the session, she was like, started talking to me about her daughter. And I was like, wow, I thought I was moving your body around. And now we're talking about relationship and you're sharing all this stuff with me. And it's like, I think movement, we don't really realize it, at least certainly not as a culture, but it's movement is expression, movement is, and it's also the place where if we were told to sit still, or if we interact mainly online, clicking, liking, or giving a thumbs down, and we don't realize that part of, yes, I know that I have pain in my right hip, and that's why I came to the movement professional. But aside from, yes, some expertise in hip joints is probably useful, it's also like this is the manifestation of so much else in my life that isn't there. And so this thing that you're doing, it makes sense to me that it's a bunch of movement people, although I'm sure there's people, in other realms who are building community, but it just, and just the last kind of point, like, I also feel like the world kind of noticed movement teachers for the first time, or in a new way during the pandemic, right? Because when everyone was in their living rooms, like, that was how crucial was it, like, whatever, your yoga teacher or whoever, but like, I thought, like, these people are like keeping people sane right now, like, you think that you're doing jumping jacks, but like, this is your sanity here.
Yeah, it truly is all relational, right? When someone hires a professional, that isn't a quick fix and leave. When someone hires a professional for routine service on whatever, particularly you, they are looking for a friend in some sorts. They are looking to unburden themselves, but there isn't like a service that is like, hey, can I pay to just listen to me and be my friend? Like, that's a therapist. Like, I would have to Google be a therapist, but you can't be like, Google find a friend, find a best friend that isn't going to judge you, right? So it's interesting how money, again, paying for services makes that okay. It makes it okay to kind of sneak that in there and ask. And that's kind of what I have found. Again, I'm reverse engineering the team, and without the game and just the people, like, what's the underneath.
Well, and it's also funny to be in, a career where your livelihood is, in that sense, being people's friends. And there's a way to say, like, wow, people need friends. This is a great thing to do. And yet, like, it does become time bound. It does become, X dollars per hour or whatever. And it's like, it's just a funny thing, because in terms of when I began training in the Feldenkrais method today, like, my sense of the kind of value of what I do in the world has gone way up, like, in terms of like, wow, people really, really need this. But it's a funny thing to also have it be, I find like I'm in contradiction all the time, that it's my livelihood. And then you get into a funny thing where even like, I don't know, the price of working with someone and what do you put into it and what is the expectation, that all, you can look at it from the point of view of entrepreneurship, but it also has very much to do with whether this person's going to get better or not. Like, am I trying to get the cheapest therapist because I'm money's tight, but then if I get the cheapest therapist, like, what kind of therapy do I get? And if I get, spend X amount of time, with the cheapest therapist, then how do I feel? And then how do I even feel about therapy in general after that? It's this really kind of convoluted situation.
It is the idea, like, price and value, right, are mirrored in the service industry. And yet, like, if I go to the store and I see chicken on sale, I'm going to buy all that chicken knowing it's the same chicken as that chicken, and I'm going to feel so good about getting that chicken cheaper. But there's something about the service industry that, and like you said, we value our sense of self in that exchange of money for time and money for service has to be valued by the other person. Right? Like, that's how that distribution goes. And we've talked about this before too. Like, I am lucky that I'm in a salary job, that all my private stuff, and like, again, I could care less if people see me or not, because my salary's set. Now, if my livelihood was based on me seeing people, things would have to change. And I don't even know if I could sustain that, or if I want to sustain that. But it is. And I always, I always thought about this, again, this idea of public education. At 18, they leave. I always wondered, I'm like, man, if I could just, what if the city of Salem could have an office in a little tiny gym, and they pay me, I don't know, $100,000 a year from their budget, and I will see anybody from Salem who has any kind of issue regarding, like, what, isn't that a beautiful, other than like the insurance companies raping people left and right, and we have 87 physical therapists, like, wouldn't that be such a beautiful concept, but it's so anti-capitalistic, right? Because it'll never be put into kind of fruition. I mean, I can't say never. Maybe.
Well, so this is why this is really why I wanted to have you come and be a guest on this podcast. Not because it's about overthrowing capitalism, but but really, I mean, we are in a place where, I mean, you don't have to like work too hard and make a too complex an argument to say like our world's in a bit of trouble these days, and it does just kind of like hit me kind of intuitively, like we need more things like think movement. It does seem to me like, however that different society we could live in, or the place where, a city would just have a budget for a person who's there to help anyone who needs it. It seems like that only happens through like, so we were just talking about like revolution, right? But there could be change from below where people just start doing things, and it spreads in the same way that like, wow, people actually really got a lot out of sitting under that swing set with the kids playing around and talking, and like, but I think, there's just so much momentum, because I have a phone and it just keeps sending me notifications about this, that, and the other thing. Like I have to, whether or not it's just the phones, I think technology is here to stay, right? But there's a way that we have to do something. It's almost countercultural in order to build community at this point. That's kind of my sense of it.
Well, if you look around, as you said, and you notice things aren't right, you also have to take into account that the way the culture is to put these things forth isn't right. So where's the likely answer? Opposite. And this is something I picked up I'm not sure why, I picked up as a young kid, like everybody's going that way. All right, well then I know I want to go that way. And it just made so much, and that's literally what I've been doing my entire life. And again, it isn't that way for the stubbornness and going there, but it's just, I'm gonna investigate there first. I'm gonna go look over there, because if you guys were right, if all these trainers are right and all these therapists were right, the society would be better. But it's not. It's worse. And people are more confused about it than any before. So what is being presented and the way it's being presented and the interaction and the cost in which that interaction is happening isn't working. So and my first thing is always, well, let's just give it away. And to truly give it away without, this is the care and attention piece. Care is time and attention. So I'm going to give you my time and attention with zero expectation of any kind of return. That's the relationship. I'm going to give it to you. I know that inherently I'm going to get something out of it. I hope that you do. But there is no like, I'm going to do A to get B. I'm just gonna do A, and we're gonna see what happens. And then at A, the result of A will tell me which direction to go. And I do the same thing in my teaching. Like if I put this over there, or if I say go ahead, what do I see? Okay, what's the trend? And then how do I adjust that trend just a little bit? Like what happens then? So it's finding the variables, and just like the marionette, adjusting the strings accordingly.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's beautiful. And I'm getting from your energy that you are getting plenty from it. Like you're motivated. I have no sense that there's a shortage there. There was something you brought up before, which I wanted to go back to because it kind of helps to complete another loop, partly how the two of us know each other. But we were talking about movement or not moving. And you kind of mentioned, well, first of all, there was the story about calling your dad and he's supporting you, to follow your dreams, and be part of the rugby team. And then later that discussion about like, there's no pain if I'm sitting in this chair, right?
Yeah.
And so you're now part of taking care of your dad. And the other thing I just want to mention, and we could talk about that if you want to, but also you hosted a call that I participated in recently, and my partner was there, and she's, her mother has Parkinson's, right? And then there was a couple of other folks on the call, and everyone was movement people, but the call was about taking care of your folks who might have health issues in older age. Someone else on the call, both of her parents are deaf, and that's been obviously like a lifelong, question of her relationship to them. And then the fellow whose father had gotten frostbite with both of his feet, and they had to amputate, and then now he's taking care of his father. And like, this is real world stuff. Like, this is parents and kids, but it's also like, this all relates to movement and getting around and just like living a healthy life. And so you'd created this Zoom call, which there was a few of us there, but I think you put out the message to everyone in Think Movement, and you're doing these kinds of calls. And there were other topics but this particular topic of caring for your parents was one of the things that you arranged. And I just thought it was beautiful. And I talked to my partner afterward, and she was like, wow, that was really good, because she's juggling all kinds of things. She's got kids too, but she's taking care of her mom and she's running her business. And so it was a really beautiful thing that you put together there.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, it's interesting because, we talked about needing help and certain things like that topic where, again, you kind of leave one life to come to another. The layer on top is that most of us have strained relationships with our parents. Mm-hmm. And now we're being asked to care for them, right? Or we're not even being asked, but we're realizing that we're the one that could do something about it. So we're stepping in. But I guess that is an example of just like the human piece of like, no, what are you really dealing with? You besides the dancer, besides the therapy, like you as a human being, like let's just talk about you. And there isn't enough space, and there isn't enough time and attention given to like just being regular. That's the other thing about, like, that's what it says on the contributors page, just for a bunch of regular people finding our way. But we aren't pizzazz. We don't have, marketing savvy. We're not putting together like this half shaded video. I'm going to shoot it once. Like, you can see it. I'm going to offer it to you for free. So, but it really is like, how do we treat each other as if we cared about them? Yeah. And it isn't always about how's work, right? When you first meet someone, they'll ask you what you do to try to like measure you up as far as how much respect to give you or not. But when you're just humans, again, you don't see 5 kids walk up to each other at the park and be like, what do you do? Right? One person's in a sandbox and the other person like shimmies over and comes down and is like, I also like sandbox, like, and they're friends. And that, like, that's another visual I have in my mind is that, I remember being a kid and you go to the next door neighbor and you'd be like, hey, can you come and play? Or hey, can Susie come and play? And, as you're an adult and as you're like removed from high school where you're no longer like in a throng of people, you have decisions that gets taken back. So TM is really like this internet way of being like, hey, you want to hang out and play? You want to be a part of this kind of this like virtual party, this virtual discussion that we're doing?
Right. And you're reminding me of a thought I had earlier today, because I was obviously thinking that we're going to be talking, and I thought, oh, we could talk about kids and grown-ups and grown-up kids, because this is kind of, and this is partly from the call too, because for some people their parents are getting a little more like kids at a certain point, and yet we're kind of these grown-up kids, who went through whatever PE class and rugby and all of the other things that we went to, and now suddenly we're trying to help each other. But I think it's like a classic, probably almost a stereotype, like the wounded healer, right? Like the person who's helping, and doing all these things, and that at the same time the self-care, even if they're teaching self-care as like, this is, hey people, I'm going to teach you self-care. Like how much is self-care does that person, like give to themselves?
Absolutely. There are these like nonsensical and somewhat hypocritical things, right? You see these people who are in amazing shape and have these super capable bodies and they never miss a workout. And my thinking goes like, do you clean out your gutters or do you sell that out? Do you hire that out? Like, do you shovel your parents' driveway or do you pay someone to do that? Like while you're doing all this work in the gym, why not use this body why not use this thing? Why not use it to help somebody? Like, why compartmentalize it into this? I need to do this. I need to do that. And again, there seems to be like this loss of, right? If you have a body that is capable, it should be capable to do anything, not just your sets and reps at the gym. Because what does that afford you? Only doing more sets and reps at the gym. Right? Like, so this is, again, all these kind of realizations. It's like, oh, it has nothing to do. Because again, everything trained for the sport, and when the sport is gone, then all you focus on is the training for training's sake. And then you get CrossFit, which is like competitive training. Again, people have all these things. It's about, people are trying to find community and trying to find purpose and find motivation at the surface level without getting deep to the underbelly of where everything is. And it is that love and belonging. And what does that look like to you? And how do you offer that?
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I don't know if there's anything else I want to add after that. Just real quickly, before we go, like, what can people do to find out more? You mentioned you have a blog.
Yeah, my personal blog is kind of my own thoughts and my world about like what I'm figuring out movement wise, what I'm seeing education and teacher wise. That's at postcompetitiveInsight.com. But the real thing, if you're a person here and you're like, man, if I could just get a group, if I could just get one person to listen to me, I recommend you go over to thinkmovement.net. Right? This is me and Seth are calling. There's a button on there that says become a contributor. I don't care how many followers you have. I don't care how many likes your social media gets. Everyone is welcome. I mean, there you will see. I mean, I can't remember. There's this gentleman named Sego. He's from Europe, but out of the blue, he sent me this paper. He has one contribution. He sent me this paper on movement culture, and it blew me away. And I was like, this is exactly why this site exists. He hasn't really been responsive for it, and he doesn't really. He has chosen, whatever reason, not to kind of be too involved, but he had something to say, and man, did it resonate. And he was spot on, and he was just a regular Joe observing. And that's where we need the observations to come from, is the regular people, the kids that aren't in the culture with all these biases. But if you're someone who is like, hey, I just want someone to take a look or maybe listen to me or see what I've noticed, click that button. Super quick form, like, hey, what did you notice? What do you have to say? And we'll start talking. It's that simple.
Yeah, and I think you can really take Christine at her word for that. I was in touch with you for a little while, and we were just emailing. It was all virtual, and then, like so many other people, the Omicron wave came, and I was sick, and then like out of the blue, I'm getting emails from Christine like, "How are you? Are you okay? Are you?" I'm like, she's never even seen me. She's making sure I'm all right. That was really sweet. Really impacted me, just that you reached out, because like we barely knew each other, but it just showed the same orientation that I think is coming right through right now. So it's beautiful.
Well, thank you. It's just one of those things where like you said yes,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you say yes once, you're in, right? There's no like, again, and even if it's like a quiet yes, or it's just like, I'm interested. That's it. You're in. There's no quotas. There's no expectation. It's whenever you're ready. Let's talk. Let's share work. Let's discuss. So
yeah, cool. Well, hopefully, maybe it won't be too long before I could meet you in person. But this was
East
awesome.
East Coast tour 2020 summer.
Yeah, great.
Over.
Yeah, hit me up. And meanwhile, like she said, check out Think Movement, and hopefully this conversation will help spread the word about what you're doing a little more. And thanks so much. Any I don't know, final words or just final thoughts you want to share before we end?
Trust yourself. Trust. Those are the two words. Trust yourself.
I love it. Great. Well, thanks, Christine.
Thank you very much.
All right.